Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anne and I'm the consultant at the Digital Transformation Hub, a part of the Info Exchange group with Connecting Up. The Hub focuses on digital technology as an enabler to support service transformation in new ways of working, assisting nonprofits on a broader digital transformation journey. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issue, please type it into the chat box on your webinar panel and I can assist you. If you have any question during the session, please also type in the chat box and Maurice will answer them by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think of throughout the session to make this as interactive a session as possible. No question is too silly. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and you have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to Cybersecurity 101 with Maurice. Hi, Maurice.
Hi, Anne. Thank you very much for that introduction and welcome everyone to this webinar on Cybersecurity 101 with essentials to keep your organization secure. So we're running this as a 30-minute session with approximately 20 minutes of content and time for questions and answers at the end. And as Anne mentioned, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and as we go and we'll get to them at the end. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today's webinar will cover what you see on the slide here as the agenda, a view of the current cybersecurity threats facing organizations, the top 5 things all not-for-profit staff must know to keep their organization's data safe, a high-level overview of some measures every organization needs to have in place, some resources, and then questions and answers particular to your environment. Information security practices are no longer a nice to have. Given the increasing nature of our digital footprint and increasing threats, we must build information security resilience into our organizations. Security has been in the headlines every month, with a number of organizations across all sectors of the economy being affected. A view of some of the headlines within the community services sector from the past year are on this slide. So on the top left, Oxfam had donor information of over 1 million Australians disclosed via a data breach when a database was accessed via a security incident. On the right, the incident in March involved a caseworker who worked at a community services organization and had access to an IT system provided by the Department of Health and Human Services. After leaving the position, his access to the system was not revoked, and he accessed confidential information related to children and committed sex offences. On the bottom left, Uniting Care Queensland had an attack on some of its IT systems and had to resort to manual workarounds because IT systems were inaccessible. And on the right, an incident experienced by Uniting Communities in South Australia, where staff were unable to access certain systems due to a cyber incident, and again, required manual workarounds and changes in business processes. Some more on this slide, the top one there from MySA government IT system where individuals' accounts were accessed via stolen password credentials. Now this was possible because people had used the same passwords across online IT systems. And when one of these systems had been compromised and passwords obtained, the same passwords gave access to their MySA Gov accounts and hence details such as their driving license numbers, which are a key piece of identity information. On the bottom left, this is from January this year, the Australian Red Cross was caught up in an incident and a database of the parent organisation, the ICRC, was compromised where personal information of people who had sought services for loved ones was accessed. And on the right there, this is just from February, in light of the Russia-Ukraine situation, there's warnings from the Australian government for organisations to adopt an enhanced cybersecurity posture. While some organizations may not be targeted directly, they could still be caught up in attempts to compromise other Australian organizations. So the impacts of the incidents from cyber attacks vary, as you can see with these particular headlines. In some cases, data is inaccessible due to being locked up by what is known as ransomware. In other cases, personal information is disclosed via a data breach that could result in harm to individuals. Some recent statistics on this slide in terms of scams and cybercrime in Australia. Now, the data points are important to review because they highlight what's going on in the landscape. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, points out that it's very common for scammers to utilize current events and crises to make their scams appear more legitimate. We saw this in 2020, where scammers first used the bushfire emergency and then the COVID-19 pandemic as a basis for new scams. Some statistics there with the loss of over $850 million in 2020 to scams. And on the right, from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and their recent cyber threat report, notes that over the 2020-2021 financial year, there have been over 67,500 cybercrime reports, and this equates to 1 every 8 minutes. So these increasing events in our headlines and statistics on cybercrime are indeed a call to action for organizations to review their security practices. A key message is that the human element is significant in the delivery of security in today's organizations. The human element is that people component. For example, for staff to be aware of certain processes and how to securely share information, or how to use technology securely by creating a strong password. Security behaviors and the culture and sentiment on security within an organization is greatly influenced by you and your perception of risk. And most importantly, these perceptions can be changed. Security is everyone's responsibility. Before we get into the content and the top 5 things to keep your organization's data safe, I wanted to make reference to Privacy Awareness Week, which is happening next month. The Privacy Awareness Week is an initiative run by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and aims to promote and raise awareness on the importance of protecting personal information. This year's theme is Privacy as the Foundation of Trust. There's some really useful content on the OAIC website at the link shown. It's also in the resources at the end, and this could be used for reference at an individual as well as an organizational level. So I encourage you to visit the OAIC website and have a look at some of the points that they list out there to protect yourself at an individual level as well as within your organizations. And being in the sector that we are with the community sector, we handle a fair amount of personal information. So the responsibility is on us to make sure that we do our duty of care to protect it. All right, let's get into the top 5 things you must know to keep your organization's data safe. The first is know how to spot a phishing email. Phishing emails are sent with the aim of tricking a recipient into clicking on links, opening attachments, or giving up their personal information. So if you look at the image on the slide here, a staff member received this email about messages that could not be delivered. So you can see the text there, Office 365 has prevented the delivery of 3 new messages. So if you look at the time, this was received fairly early in the morning, 6:20 a.m., and may have been one of the first emails they saw as they scrolled through their inbox. They clicked on the review button and were presented with what was, looked like a standard Office 365 or SharePoint login page with their username already filled in. So they entered their password and they clicked login. Now, at that point, they had given up their password. Fortunately, in this case, multi-factor authentication was employed, which is that additional factor that you can use to access an IT system in addition to a password. And their account access was blocked by whoever had received their password. The staff member was still asked to change their password as a precaution. Now, if you look at the telltale signs in this email, the from address has got a .de extension, which doesn't look like it's anything to do with, Office 365. The link just next to the review button has some strange characters in it, even though, it had probably had the staff member's name here and the organization. The link does not look like anything to do with Office 365. So these are some of the telltale signs of a phishing email. Not always easy to spot, but important to pay attention to, and also noting that in this case, the use of multi-factor authentication was important in preventing somebody else getting access to their account if they've typed in their password into a fraudulent website. Multi-factor authentication would have blocked access to Office 365 in this case. Here's another example of a real-life phishing email, which is what is called business email compromise. So this email request was received by payroll department and appeared to come from a staff member requesting a change of bank details. So, it said, I'd like to change my details effective for the current pay date. My account is closed and I've changed to a new financial institution. The payroll department responded requesting the new bank details and not noticing the from email address. And only when the second email came through did payroll realize, due to the grammar in the email, that this was not legitimate. So again, the telltale sign in this email is the from address. It wasn't the organization's standard email address that this was coming from. It's a different address. So another one to look out for. And as I mentioned, business email compromises is a common threat that has been flagged by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. It's where a malicious party will try to divert funds. In this case, it's via payroll. It could also be via supplier invoices, where they try and say, as a supplier, we've changed our bank account details. Please now pay into this alternate account. And the thing to do in that case, which is a good thing, is to always pick up the phone and validate with the supplier. Did you send me this email? Did you want me to change your bank account details? Because a number of organizations have lost funds this way. Okay, this is another. This one's got an attachment, which is at the bottom here, and requests payment of a large amount of money. And while you might notice the email address again looks suspect, it's a .de extension, it might be tempting to click on the attachment and see what it's about. But sometimes these attachments can have malware or what's malicious software with them that would then be installed on your machine. So important when you receive these emails, just to notify your IT provider or somebody in your organization, and then delete the email and not click on the attachments. This is a useful poster which highlights the general attributes of a phishing email. Note that not all these may apply, as phishing emails can have different intents. We saw some of these examples, the strange from address, poor spelling or grammar or design, attachments that you're not sure of, they look suspicious, urgent calls to action as well. So with phishing, the attacker uses social engineering principles to trick the person into performing an action. And these principles may be a sense of urgency or scarcity. And if we look at this particular example on the poster here, the message is that you're eligible for a tax refund. I mean, who wouldn't like that? It's it's a very welcome situation. So it would be really enticing to click on the link or open the attachment, but it's really important to take note of the telltale signs in these emails. And another thing also is, while this poster references what to look out for in email, the same technique is used to get people into clicking on things and giving up information via phone calls or text messages, and also via messaging apps. So it's not just email. So important to take note of anything that you receive. If it looks suspicious and you were not expecting it, then it's best to just ignore it. Okay, we now have a poll with 2 questions along the topic of can you spot a fish? So these were taken from the ACCC Scam Watch quiz, which is available free online. And this is the first question. You received this email from MyGov asking you to verify your identity. What would you do? So we'll give everyone some time to review this. There's 2 responses on the bottom. Think about which response you'd select, and then we'll have the poll up with the same responses, and I'd ask you to select one. Okay, and if we could have the poll up now, please. Okay, we've got the poll up. Same 2 responses. Please select one. Give everyone a couple more seconds.
90% voted. Should we close the poll now?
Has everyone voted?
Oh yeah, 100% now.
Okay, great. Okay, great. I can see everybody selected delete the email, it's a scam. That's correct. The Australian government will never ask you to follow a link in an email or SMS to verify your identity. Another sign this is a scam. If you look at the sender's address, no reply at aussie.com, all government agency addresses would end in .gov.au. Another way to check, which we can't really do because this is an image, would be to hover over the link here and see what it looks like. If it looks like it's taking you to a .gov website, that would be another way to check. So just important again to be vigilant of looking at the address, where it's coming from, and what it's asking you to do and to click on. Thank you for that. This is the second question. Your boss sends you this email. What should you do? Again, 2 responses, and we'll have a poll up with the same 2.
I'll now launch the poll.
Yes, please. Thanks, Anne. Ready when you are to close it off.
Only 80% has voted. I'll leave.
Okay, a couple more seconds.
Okay, now I'll close the poll.
Yep, great, thank you. Okay, yes, ignore the email and contact IT. You can see everybody put that in. This is not your boss. The sender's address is different from your manager's email address, even if it was john@services.com. If you look very carefully at the I in the word services, it's a different font. And this is some technique that's used sometimes within website addresses as well as email addresses to use an alternate font or something called typo squatting. So this would not be your boss sending you this email. And in this case, again, when you're asked to release funds or to buy gift cards, this is a common scam. The good practice would be to always check, even though your boss says ASAP, it's best to wait and confirm that. All right, thank you for that. So the first point was on phishing. The second one is on protecting information, particularly sensitive information. A number of data breaches happen due to human error and people not storing or sharing information securely. Information is a key asset of an organization, and so it must be protected. And this is particularly true for sensitive information such as health data and client records. So if within your organization you collect information considered confidential or sensitive by certain industry standards or laws, then you must take reasonable measures to protect it. And for personal information, these may be measures such as only collecting the information you need for a particular purpose, ensuring that sensitive data such as health data and client case records is only stored in particular locations where it should be, such as a client and case management system, because that system will have the protections around it to protect that data. Another measure may be ensuring that there is awareness among volunteers and staff on how certain types of information is to be handled and communicated. And also, it's very important to ensure that your data is backed up. If you store it in a certain location where you're supposed to be storing it, then it would be backed up. And if in the event, your machine fails or you have a security incident such as ransomware, your data can be restored from a backup and you can continue to work as you would with your normal business operations. So important to have oversight of where information should be stored so that it's appropriately protected. The third point is on using good password practices. A good password may be based on a phrase that you know. You could compose the password by picking out the first letters of each word, capitalize some, add in some digits, and you may also hear the word or the term passphrase, which is essentially 4 more random words strung together to make a password. So it's important as well with constructing passwords to keep your personal details out of it. It's also very important not to reuse passwords, because if a password is compromised from one system and has been reused on another, it's easy for a malicious party to get access into this other system. And we saw that with some of the headlines we reviewed earlier with the MySA government IT system. If you need to write passwords down, store them securely, not on a post-it note on your screen. And if you have too many passwords to remember, do consider a good password manager. There's a couple out there that would be useful to store passwords if you have lots to remember. Now, we touched on multi-factor authentication earlier. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, or you might also hear it referred to as 2FA, which is two-factor authentication, is the practice of using a password and another factor to log into an account. So the images on the slide here are that of Microsoft Authenticator, which is an app that you can install on your smartphone, and you can use that as a token to access accounts in addition to your password. Another practice in terms of passwords is it's best not to share IT system accounts and passwords, but understandably, in certain organizations, this is not always possible, particularly if you have volunteers within your organization. So if you do share accounts and passwords, be cautious of how that password is shared around. It should only be shared with those who need to know it. And if somebody who was using the account and the password leaves the organization or is no longer volunteering with you, for example, then you should change the password on the account. The fourth tip is to keep your device secure. Now, this is in a physical sense, as well as securing the software on your device. So physically protected when you carry it, lock your screen when you move away from your desk if you're working in an office, or even if you're working at home and you have confidential information on your screen. It's also very important to keep devices up to date with software updates. So that's on your operating systems, if you have, for example, a Windows machine, and also your applications such as your web browsers, whether you use the likes of Chrome, Firefox for web browsers. Also not installing unauthorized software on your organization's devices. Be clear about what you're allowed to install and where you're allowed to store your organization's data. If you use your own PC for work, you must be aware again of the types of information that you're allowed to store on your device. And if you're not sure where you should be storing certain things, do ask, because that's how we raise awareness of the protections that are required to protect information, particularly personal information. And if you're using your own PC again for work, and you have children in your home who are using your PC, be aware of what they do on the device. If they install software such as games, sometimes these can have malicious software components installed on them. It's important to also have a good antivirus installed. And we have a number of organizations who report security breaches because they're using an infected home PC without the appropriate protections. If you're using your own mobile device or other device, again, as I mentioned, make sure that you only store information that your organization is comfortable for you to store. And in the case of a mobile phone, a mobile device, ensure it has appropriate security controls, like it's password protected, or you have a fingerprint to unlock, you're installing security updates, there's remote wipe capability, etc. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. The fifth one is to report anything you're not sure about. Security incidents are adverse events which pose a threat to an organization's information systems and services. So if there's anything that you see in terms of activity on your device, or information has been shared with the wrong person, that in a sense would constitute a security incident or an event that would need to be investigated and could possibly result in an incident. So some examples are on the slide there. Lost devices, disclosure of information, as I mentioned, to an unauthorized person, somebody on your office premises who you're not sure, and that may be the case now with some organizations returning to the workplace and seeing new colleagues for the first time. So if you see somebody like that, maybe introduce yourself or ask the question, are you new? Can I help you if you're not sure what they're looking for? And a very important point is to ensure who you should report potential security incidents to within your organization. Is it an IT point of contact? Is it your manager? Make sure that you understand who that person is. And the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has expanded its 24-hour call center capabilities to benefit small and medium-sized organizations. This is a useful resource. They have a hotline that you can call if you're not sure about something from a security perspective. Okay, so that wraps up the 5 things that all staff need to know. Some key takeaways in just terms of summary points. Always using strong, unique passwords is one of the most important things you can do, coupled with multi-factor authentication for critical or information systems that have sensitive data. Be aware of phishing emails, as we saw on the poster and with some of the examples. Some websites can be mimicked to look like real supplier or bank websites. As I mentioned, in the case of business email compromise, that's a trend in terms of an attack vector that's being used to channel funds out of organizations. So to be aware of that. The last 4 in gray font are things that your organization should have in place and should make you aware of. Where should you be storing sensitive data? Ensuring multi-factor authentication is configured on those IT systems that have sensitive information or are considered critical in a sense. Having IT and security policies in place that outline expectations for staff on how things should be done and outline behaviors expected, and also a contact point for who staff should report something to if they're not sure. All right, so a listing of useful resources here. The Digital Transformation Hub has a series of guides on cybersecurity as well as other topics that I encourage you to visit. You could also book a consult with a tech advisor via the hub. Privacy Awareness Week, as we touched on earlier, the link is there. The ACCC Scam Watch quiz that we worked through a couple of examples of, as well as a link from the ACSC, cyber.gov.au, on a scam, can you spot a scam? And a couple of other useful resources as well on this slide. All right, that just about wraps up the content. So happy for questions now. Thank you, Anne. Are you seeing any questions in chat, Anne?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Please feel free to put a question in the chat. There's a question here. If I'm using my own device for work, are there any specific risks associated with that? And how can I manage those?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anne, for that question. So as I mentioned, if you're using your own device for work, it's important to understand your organization's perspective on what you're allowed to store on your device. So if you're using it obviously to store certain types of sensitive information, should you be storing it on a central repository elsewhere that may be, for example, a cloud-based system, as opposed to storing it locally on the device? Because if it's on a certain system, it will be backed up and it'll be protected that way. Whereas if your own device for any reason was to have a fault and crash, then you might lose information. The other thing is also to make sure you've got updates, software updates, as was mentioned, operating system, as well as web browsers that you would be using, and any other software such as Zoom or the like that you might have installed on your device. Software has vulnerabilities that are sometimes exploited. which means that you might be browsing the web. There might be a website that's been compromised. You click on a link on that website and you have malware installed on your device that can take advantage of a vulnerability that's not been updated. That's why it's important to keep your software up to date. Another thing also would be to make sure you have a good antivirus that you've installed on your own device. There's some antivirus products that are free for home users. For example, Sophos, that's one that's available for download. So those are the sorts of measures that you can have in place to mitigate any of the risks that might arise out of using your own device for work purposes.
I have another question here. Can you recommend a password manager?
Yes, as I said, there's a few good ones out there. The important thing is to make sure it allows for multiple accounts to be created, if you're using it obviously in the organizational context, and also that it has multi-factor authentication. So Dashlane is one product that's available to not-for-profits via the Connecting Up platform. Other ones that I'm aware of are LastPass and 1Password.
Amazing. We have a question here. What do we do if someone clicks on a suspect link in an email?
Okay, so links in an email can result in, again, malware or malicious software being downloaded and installed on your machine. Or sometimes the link might be a link to log into a certain site, as we saw in one of the phishing email examples where you're asked to log into Office 365. So if you've clicked on a link and you're not sure and you've given up your password, the first thing you should do would be to change your password. As well as if you've clicked on a link and software, you're not sure if something may be installed, notify your IT team, or if you've got an antivirus software, immediately run a scan on your machine. And if you notify your IT team, they would probably do the same thing, run a scan, ask you to change your password, check access logs on your machine. So those are the sorts of things you could do if you're not sure if you've clicked on something suspect.
Anyone have any other questions? If there is no other questions, we'll wrap up the webinar here. There will be a short survey after these sessions. Please feel free to send us any question even after that at our event email. Thank you, Maurice, and thank you all for joining us today. See ya.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.